Hey guys, it's Casey. Welcome back to my life. In today's PhD vlog, I'm going to rant a bit because I'm quite frustrated with a situation that came to light this morning. So today was supposed to be my first day as a teaching assistant at Trinity College. I was a teaching assistant at my previous institution during my master's degree, but Trinity's policy is that only confirmed PhD students, so students who have undergone a submission and interview process in their second year, can teach in the School of English. Having submitted my first chapter now and being scheduled for my interview, I am now eligible to teach, and so I'm going to be teaching this semester. The reason I'm making this video today is because I woke up to the news that the Trinity Financial Committee has passed a motion to reduce casual pay rates by 20%. Casual pay rates include postgraduate teaching assistants. And while I might not be directly affected by the cuts because ultimately it's just kind of the pay range which is being altered and it's still up to the school to determine the actual rate of pay, it is extremely frustrating that this is happening on the first day of courses. I'm sure many people who will be affected by this have set up their lives in anticipation of being paid a certain amount. And for people who are working paycheck to paycheck, a 20% pay decrease is extremely impactful. And this pay decrease will target some of the most precarious employees on staff. In many parts of the world, being a PhD student is considered a full-time job and is salaried, or at least students are given a stipend for their living expenses and not charged tuition. Even in the United States, often graduate funding packages include tuition waivers, as well as money towards living expenses. And these are frequently very paltry. They're not extravagant. People are living often below the poverty line. It's not like I went into a PhD thinking it was going to be a lucrative 4 years. In fact, I started my PhD completely unfunded, so I had to pay my tuition out of pocket and dipped into my savings and a previous grant I had been awarded that I hadn't used all of in order to pay both my tuition and my rent for the first year. As of my second year, I'm now funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. Say that 5 times fast. But even with a grant, and a significant grant at that, I will barely be breaking even this year. In fact, I'm not breaking even because I'm also taking out student loans. I'm going to be super upfront about the money here. It's a bad situation, and this is for someone who has been lucky enough to be awarded a grant. So my SHRC, SSHRC, is in the amount of $20,000 per annum. My tuition comes out to just over 10,500 euros per year, which converts to a little over $16,000. So out of my $20,000 grant, I'm left with less than $4,000 per year Canadian to put towards rent and food and travel costs associated with doing a PhD in Europe. That's like what, 2,500 euro? My rent for just me is 550 euros per month. I live in a shared apartment with 4 people, my partner and I and another couple, and their 2 dogs. It's not a big apartment, and splitting it between 4 people and 2 large dogs is trying at times. But even this situation is way better than some of the situations that other graduate students have found themselves in. If I weren't able to split the rent with my partner, I would not be able to afford the room in this apartment that I currently sleep in. Our room in this 2-bedroom apartment costs 1,100 euros per month. Just my half of the rent costs 800 Canadian dollars per month, or $9,600 per year. Between the 2 of us, we're paying $1,600 per month for a room in a shared apartment. The housing crisis in Dublin is so bad that many people are sharing an apartment with more than 4 people. Some places are putting in bunk beds, so you have 4 people to a room, and in an apartment with 3 bedrooms, you might have 6, 8, or even 10 people. I saw an ad on a Dublin housing group asking 550 euros per month for a single bed that was a cot in the kitchen of a shared apartment with 10 other people. Living costs in this city are skyrocketing, and many people don't have external funding, which means they have to work in order to put themselves through graduate degrees. It's extremely cost prohibitive for anyone who doesn't come from money, who doesn't have independent means or a well-paying side job, or can do part-time, and God forbid anyone have a family and children to support while they're doing a PhD in this city. A 20% pay reduction might not sound like a lot, but for people who are living paycheck to paycheck, this will be really impactful on their lives. And as it stands, the casual pay rates at Trinity are not sufficient to support anybody, even working full-time. And the reason for this is that there's a lot of unpaid work So for example, I'm going to be teaching 3 tutorials this semester. Even getting paid at the top of the current pay grade, I would be making 35 euros per session. Now that sounds like a lot of money, 35 euros per hour. Except I only get paid for 3 hours per week. So I teach 3 tutorials, I get paid for 3 hours. What that doesn't include is all of the unpaid labor and time that goes into preparing for those tutorials, going to the lectures for the classes, because we are expected to attend some, if not most, of the lectures that the students are also attending. It doesn't include the amount of time it takes to read the course materials and prepare for seminars. And it also is not indicative of what we're being paid for marking. So at Trinity, the pay rate for marking is about 7 euros per paper. That means if you take more than half an hour to mark a paper, you are getting paid less than minimum wage. The amount of time that goes into prepping for a single seminar may be several hours. So for example, if you have to attend a 1-hour lecture on your topic, then also read the book that the students will be discussing and prepare seminar questions. I mean, you could be looking at 3 hours of work per seminar, or even 4 or 5, and none of that work is covered. I'm getting paid for 3 hours per week, but I might be working 8, 9, 10 hours per week. And that's not even to cover things like travel costs and time. It takes me 30 minutes to get to school on foot or by bus, and if I take the bus, it costs me 4 euros total, about 2 each way, to get there and back. The last couple of weeks I haven't been able to walk to campus because I dislocated my knee pretty badly, and I'm using a cane currently. So it would take me probably over an hour to walk if I wanted to, and it's just not feasible for me right now, so I have to take the bus. So there and back I'm spending 4 euros per day minimum on transit. And lots of people have to come from outside Dublin because of the housing crisis and are commuting much longer times, and paying much more, for example, the train to come into Dublin from the suburbs or even out farther, because the city centre is so completely unaffordable for anyone on a graduate student stipend. Even people who have gotten Irish stipends, and so for example the IRC, the Irish Research Council's grant, includes a tuition waiver, or at least for EU fees, which I think are about half as much as international student fees, and then an additional 16,000 euros per year. Even that amount of money would not cover the cost of living in this city. I made a tweet about my financial situation the other day and received the feedback that it was incredibly shocking that a school with as much money as Trinity College, first of all, doesn't fund its PhD students, doesn't provide any kind of tuition waiver or stipend or graduate funding package at all for PhD students who don't have an external grant. And now to hear the news that they're attempting to reduce the pay for casual work, including that of PhDs, is incredibly disheartening. Recently, and when I say recently, I mean for the last several years, I've been seeing jokes about graduate students being packed like sardines into apartments that are tiny and not up to code, and health risks and fire hazards, memes about greedy landlords and students eating ramen for 3 meals a day. You can't live like that. It's not funny. Being a graduate student shouldn't mean putting up with poverty. It shouldn't be funny to joke that graduate students aren't able to eat anything but ramen and rice. It shouldn't be necessary to start food banks to support students. So many other places in the world are able to support their graduate students and pay them what they're worth. The whole university system would collapse without our labor. We are an integral part of the university and yet are treated like students. We are employees. We are producing the next generation of scholarship and knowledge and doing all kinds of other unpaid labor. So for example, you write all these conference reports where you have to then pay to travel and present at conferences, which is a necessary part of a PhD. You also have to publish periodically articles in journals, which is something you don't get paid for. Often you also have to contribute things like book chapters to academic books or even whole monographs. And those kind of major writing tasks also are frequently either unpaid or really underpaid. One of my lecturers recently joked about receiving a royalties check for 2 euros. And this is pretty common. There's tons of unpaid labor in academia, which is why when people complain that academics are overpaid, they're not seeing the full picture. Often academics are working 100 hours a week, but only being paid for 25 or 30. Adjuncts and temporary lecturers are also in an incredibly precarious situation where they might be contracted for 1 or 2 courses for a semester, but no guarantee that they'll get one for the next year or the next semester, and are living with the situation that they don't know if they're going to have work in 2 months. There's absolutely no stability for anyone who is coming fresh out of a PhD applying for lecturer positions, because the number of tenure track positions are dwindling, even as people are retiring and dying and leaving those positions. Rather than create a new tenure track position for a professor, universities are choosing to take on 2 adjuncts who can do twice as much work for half as much money or less. Some people are being paid as little as €2,000 a course for a whole year of teaching. What makes the situation at Trinity all the more distasteful to me is that we're also in a situation where I, as a member of the School of English, currently do not have any representation on the Graduate Student Union. Postgraduate students, despite being, again, an integral part of the university, and teachers are not part of a teaching union or a workers' union. We have no one fighting for us. The School of English is supposed to have a representative for both postgraduate students and also for teaching assistants specifically. So there are 2 different roles that have currently gone unfilled for over 2 years. I recently had a clandestine meeting with a member of staff who was concerned that there hasn't been any PhD representation or postgraduate representation in the GSU for a really long time from the School of English. And I was told that originally the School of English would appoint someone or have kind of an election or ask people to nominate someone to fill that role, but that several years ago that role was taken over by the GSU. The GSU says no, the school can't be a part of that, that there has to be independent elections that would be run by the GSU, the Graduate Student Union, and then they would fill that position from someone within each school. And this went on for some time where the Graduate Student Union was handling that, and that there was someone being either elected or appointed to that position every year. But for the last 2.5 years or possibly longer, there has not been any postgraduate representation or teaching assistant representation from the School of English present in the GSU. Myself and other students have contacted the GSU about taking on one of those roles each, and have heard nothing. And then again, to get the news that casual pay rates are being reduced this year is extremely frustrating. And while I'm not sure that if we had representation that they would have been in that room, they probably wouldn't have been, it's still very disheartening. It can't go on like this. We need unions to represent teachers, and if the Graduate Students Union will not represent us the way that we need to be represented, then something else needs to be done. At my previous institution, to be completely transparent, I received $8,000 Canadian, or about €6,000, to teach a full year course. I taught 2 tutorials for the full year, and I was not only paid per tutorial, I was paid to attend lectures, an hour of prep time each week, as well as marking papers. To break it down, I'll be making less than €90 a week before taxes at Trinity. And that pay only lasts for 7 weeks. There are only 7 weeks of tutorials out of the 12 weeks of a course. That's about €600. I will also be paid about €7 per paper to mark, and I expect to have about 30 students. To compare that to my previous institution where we were part of a union who negotiated our pay on our behalf, I was paid about the equivalent of €3,000 for the semester versus about 600. I was being paid 3 times as much as a master's student being a teaching assistant in Canada than I am in Ireland, where the cost of living is over twice as high. Doing a PhD in a place without a full funding package, and actually even in places where there is a stipend or tuition waiver included in your package, can be extremely cost prohibitive for anyone coming from a working class background or anyone who doesn't have a nest egg to fall back on. I was lucky enough to have some savings that allowed me to pursue this course of action. But without that, and without the many scholarships I've been awarded over the course of my academic career, I would not be able to do what I'm doing. And for people to make jokes about that, about students living off ramen and rice, and not being able to feed themselves, or living in squalor out of a suitcase in a bunk bed in a room with 3 other bunk beds, is not funny, and it's not sustainable. If you want to hear me rant more about various aspects of doing a PhD, consider following me on social media. I'm at My Exploding Pen on Twitter. I recently had a tweet go viral, so that's cool. Or you could subscribe to my channel. There'll be a little button. Okay. I'm off to teach.